Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. It has been, feels like for me, a very long break from recording. This last month, through the month of December, I had shared Doors of the Universe, or no, sorry, We Don't Talk Politics past episodes. That was another podcast that I was a part of with two other friends, which had a very similar format. But we got busy, so I kind of wanted to keep doing this. So I split off and started doing my own thing. Maybe at some point we'll get back together, and all of us will start making at least a couple more episodes or something. I know, pretty sure everybody enjoyed doing it. So, but yeah, so we are back. I am back. We are back. We're here together after the holiday break, after all that jazz. I took 3 weeks off work because I used very little PTO through the year and was able to have 3 weeks off. So I got to go back home for a while. I got to visit the East Coast. I got to see Boston. I've never been to the East Coast. I've never seen Boston. Never seen Maine. I had gone to, no, not Maine. We didn't go to Maine. We went to Rhode Island, but not Maine. But yeah, it was a nice little mental health break for me from work and from recording, which honestly, this isn't terrible. This doesn't put strain on my mental health. The line of work I do can occasionally be more challenging, just because it has its days. But overall, I am glad to be back, glad to be recording. Trying to think if there was anything really spectacular, amazing that happened. It was just a really good break. As I'm sure most of you know, I'm from Iowa originally. I'm in the Midwest. And the first week I was back, the Friday that I was there, the high was -2. And then, like a day before I left, which was like a week and a half later, it was 59 degrees there. Tell me something's not going on with the weather. Tell me something not going on. All right, so that's that. But yeah, I'm back, and I've got this sweet sword shirt, which I am sad to announce that the sword has broken up. I don't know, maybe you've never heard the sword, never listened to the sword, but if you haven't, I highly recommend them, especially if you like stoner metal and doom metal. I don't think they really do metal, but stoner metal for sure. But they were one of my favorite metal bands, and they decided they had done all they wanted to do, so they were just going to break up and not just make music like that anymore. I think they're going to have their own individual projects and stuff from here, but yeah, I saw online they were going out and they had one shirt that was available in my gargantuan 3X size. So I picked that up because I knew I may never get a sword shirt if I don't. And I don't believe I had in their shirts. I got to see them live. I was lucky enough to see them live twice. They came to Des Moines, I believe twice. But yeah, sad day. Check them out. So this episode, I wanted to get this recorded before I left for my vacation. Have it one last episode in November before doing all the We Don't Talk Politics episodes loading on there. But it didn't happen. I don't know what it is about this episode, but this is one I have definitely struggled with trying to sit down and record. I don't know why, it's just not sticking. Like, a lot of times when I'm recording, I'm like, oh, I've learned this information. I may forget it later, but at the time, during the, like, doing the research and everything, I'll remember it and like, oh, I remember this about this and this. And not happening with this one. So we're gonna plow through this because this is the final episode in this series. Initially, I wanted to do, when I first started the UFO alien. It's more UFO, I don't think. Yeah. So when I started this little 3 or 4 part series, I think this is the 3rd part. Forgive me, I've been gone for 3 weeks. I have been away from podcasting for about a month. But yeah, this was initially the subject that I wanted to do, and then all these other things started popping up, and I was like, well, we should probably cover these too, because these happened before and actually led to this point. What it is I'm doing today is Project Blue Book. Yeah, and as I was doing research into it and looking more into it, it was like, what led to Project Blue Book being formed? So that was the podcast prior to this, the November on, the ones before December. But there is no way to do this but to just get into it, because like I said, I don't know what it is about this one. I did the research, but nothing stuck to the wall. It wasn't sticking in my brain for some reason. So it's going to be mainly reading, but a little bit of input on the side. There was one other thing. So I was at work the other night, and as we know, I work out, as I've mentioned before. You may not know. This may be the first time you ever listen to this episode. Thank you for listening. Thank you for joining us. But if you have listened before, if you are familiar with the podcast, I do work outside. I do shelter work. And the other night I went outside and we looked. One of my coworkers is also a big UFO alien enthusiast. And we looked outside and we were looking in the sky. We always look to the sky. Gotta keep an eye to the sky, remember? But he saw this like light, and it was just sitting there in the sky. It was like, and he said he'd been watching it for about 10 minutes. And it was blinking red, green, and white. I think it was like maintaining white, and then it seemed like it was blinking red and green. This was, what night was this? It's Thursday, so that was on Monday night was my last night. Monday night going into Tuesday morning. And that was, yeah, so we looked up and he saw that over there. And then we looked at it and he said he'd been checking it, like he checked out like 10 minutes ago and it hadn't moved at all. We're getting binoculars. I was gifted a binocular, but what unocular? I was gifted a telescope. I don't know what you would call it. But it was one thing I was gifted it by my girlfriend's mom during New Year's. But either way, I got that, and he actually ordered binoculars. So, because as much as we're out at night and looking at the skies, it's kind of cool to see all the stuff that's out there. Either way, we saw this one. We saw this light. And it was sitting there just in the sky. It was too far. It was too close. I felt like it was too close to be a plane, but too far away to be like a drone. And then one of the participants talked to us, and she was like, you need to see these over here. So we go over about probably 30 feet over in a different area where there's less light pollution and stuff. And you could see like 6 or 7 of them. And they were, like I said, they were white light, but they were blinking green and red. And like it wasn't moving. Like they were just stationed there. So we're assuming what it was, we're just assuming it was satellites. I mean, that was the guess. But didn't look into it much. Need to look into it more. That's the thing. I love looking at the sky, even if it is just satellites. It's really cool that you've got this thing that's just emitting information all over that's so far away, but you can still, it's clearly visible that it's there. But I had another coworker who was like, I don't see any lights. And I was like, there's lights there. And me and the first coworker both agreed, yeah, it's blinking these colors, whatever this. So I was like, there's no lights there. I was like, so, and the second coworker was also like, well, if it's blinking, that's because stars blink. So I looked it up because I was like, what does make a star twinkle or not? And it was the pollution and stuff that gets in the way, so it may appear like it's blinking. I believe it was, if it's blinking, it's a star, but if it's not blinking, it's a planet or satellite. So that's where my confusion was. I need to do more research into it. If you know more than I know, get back to me, tell me. Because, yeah, if you know anything about a light in the sky that was white with blue and green blinks, that is, yeah, that was my cool night sky experience recently. I shared it on Instagram and the TikTok. The video I got of the Starlink, the Elon Musk's satellites going up into space, which freaked me out the night I saw it because I hadn't seen about it. It was neat to see, but it was also kind of a little weird because it was just a straight line of lights that just went up to the sky, and then slowly, once they hit a certain point, they just started disappearing one by one. So, that's where we are right now. But where we are right now is getting on with this podcast and getting this going because we're going to just have to do it. That's all there is to it. So like I said, this is the final episode in this little series. And it covers 3 different government studies, U.S. government studies that were done about UFOs and UAPs, as we call them now. Shortly after Roswell had happened. So let's talk about the first one. The first one is Project Sign, which was also called Project Saucer. It was an official U.S. government study of unidentified flying objects, UFOs, undertaken by the United States Air Force, the USAF, and active for most of 1948. If I remember right, Roswell happened in 1947, as did the Kenneth Arnold sightings and everything else. So it was you've got all these people that are reporting these sightings now, and the government's taking notice. They're like, maybe we should look into this, as many people are claiming it, and it's not just, and it's reliable sources as well. So, the history of Project Sign. The project was established in 1948 by Air Force General Nathan Twining, head of Air Technical Service Command, and was initially named Project Saucer. The goal of the project was to collect, evaluate, and distribute within the government all information relating to UFO sightings, on the premise that they might represent a national security concern. On April 27, 1949, the U.S. Air Force publicly released a paper prepared by the Intelligence Division of the Air Materiel Command at Wright-Patterson Field, Ohio. The paper stated that while some UFOs appeared to represent actual aircraft, there was not enough data to determine their origin. Almost all cases were explained by ordinary causes, but the report recommended a continuation of the investigation of all sightings. Project Sign was first brought up in The book, The Report on Unidentified Flying Objects in 1956 by retired Air Force Captain Edward J. Ruppelt. R-U-P-P-E-L-T. I'm going Ruppelt. Who later directed Project Blue Book. In this, he also claimed that Sign had produced an estimate of the situation. Air quotes, estimate of the situation, which endorsed an interplanetary explanation for UFOs. But General Hoyt Vandenberg, Chief of Staff of the Air Force, shut down Project Sign for lack of proof. No copy of this document or any other corroboration of Ruppelt's claim has been produced, and popular mechanics called the report probably more mythological than real. In comes the Caldwell investigation. If you go on the Instagram or the Twitter, you will see pictures of what we're about to talk about, some Caldwell aircrafts. In May of 1949, officers of Project Sign received a letter from an aeronautical company shareholder who explained that the Grey Goose Company had been building aircraft similar to the flying saucers, which were then a popular topic in the press. This was during the UFO craze following Kenneth Arnold's reports of seeing UFOs over Mount Rainier, and the Roswell incident that followed. The Air Force had canvassed for reports of flying saucers, and the shareholder apparently felt the inventor, Jonathan Edward Caldwell's disc rotor might explain them. And if you look at these planes, they definitely have, they do and they don't, because they look like planes, but I'm sure in the night sky they might look more like UFOs, just because it is this giant circular rotor disc on the top that is the size of the plane, but it is still a plane. So let's see. Tracking down the leads, the team, accompanied by Maryland police, visited an abandoned farm in Glen Burnie, Maryland, outside Baltimore, where the damaged remains of Caldwell's disc rotor aircraft were discovered. They also tracked down Driggers, who told them the story of the attempted flight in 1937 to 1938. The team reported that the prototypes could not be responsible for the flying saucer reports that were being received from all around the country. Photographs of the broken disc rotor machine continue to appear in UFO books to this day. They were often described as crashed UFO saucers in earlier works, claiming it was one more example of the USAF being in possession of such vehicles. More recently, they are normally connected with the claims that the Nazis had built working flying saucers late in the war, lumped together with other disc-shaped aircraft like the Avrocar, which I think I shared a picture of that on one of the older episodes. It's on Instagram. Arthur Sack AS-6 and the Vought V-173, in an effort to demonstrate that such aircraft were both possible and well-researched. So, that is what we have for Project Sign. Project Sign was short-lived and only lasted for a year. So in comes Project Grudge, another short-lived project by the U.S. Air Force to investigate unidentified flying objects, UFOs. Project Grudge followed Project Sign after a conclusion was reached that UFO reports could be exploited by a foreign power to induce panic in the population and were therefore a military issue in the post-World War II Cold War climate. This led Project Grudge to publicly disparage all UFO reports as a result of A. misidentifications of various conventional objects, B. a mild form of mass hysteria and war nerves, C. individuals who fabricate such reports to perpetuate a hoax or to seek publicity, or D. psychopathological persons. That's us. So yeah, that's it. They mainly put it in place because they believed that it was going to induce panic in the population, which I think the government already does a good enough job of that on its own. But either way, let's get to history. Project Grudge was intended to alleviate public anxiety over UFOs and persuade the public that the UFOs constituted nothing unusual or extraordinary. UFO sightings were explained as balloons, conventional aircraft, planets, meteors, optical illusions, solar reflections, or even large hailstones. My goodness, that's a large hailstone. Project officials recommended that the project be reduced in scope because the very existence of Air Force offset interests encouraged people to believe in UFOs and contributed to a war hysteria atmosphere. On December 27th, 1949, the Air Force announced the project's termination. So we've got this project that comes along to alleviate public anxiety around UFOs, and then we're like, no, we're going to terminate that after a year. Conclusion: Project Grudge issued its only formal report in August of 1949. The report's conclusions included: A. There is no evidence that objects reported upon are the result of an advanced scientific foreign development, and therefore they constitute no direct threat to the national security. In view of this, it is recommended that the investigation and study of reports of unidentified flying objects be reduced in scope. Constitute no direct threat to the national security. Apparently they've never seen Independence Day, and I'll tell you that they haven't because this is 1949, and Independence Day didn't come out too much later. B. All evidence and analyses. Say that 5 times. Analyses. All evidence and analyses indicate that reports of unidentified flying objects are the result of one, which we've already gone over this. It's the same thing. The report says the same thing that we talked about earlier, that the report says that it's one, misinterpretation of various conventional objects, a mild form of mass hysteria and war nerves, 3, individuals who fabricate such reports to perpetuate a hoax or to seek publicity, 4, psychopathological persons. The recommendations, air quotes, section suggested that Air Force personnel receive basic instruction in astronomical phenomena. The response. So yeah, it just seems weird to me. I don't know. I feel like canceling it when those are your reasons. Never mind. We'll get to my thoughts at the end of all this. Response. An article by Sidney Shallett appeared in 2 consecutive issues of the Saturday Evening Post, April 30th and May 7th of 1949, and supported Project Grudge's assessment that the UFO reports could be explained by mundane phenomena, and the hoaxes and crackpots played a prominent role in popularizing UFOs. Astronomer and ufologist J. Allen Hynek criticized Project Grudge, claiming the project was less science and more of a public relations campaign. Project Grudge also received criticism from former intelligence officer Edward J. Ruppelt, who was, and I quote, convinced of the alien nature of UFOs and how he has seen the military and the U.S. government trying to discredit the extraterrestrial hypothesis. Hynek and Ruppelt claimed that the project was, and I quote, as far from an objective scientific examination of the phenomena as one could get. Alright, so now we have Ruppelt and Hynek here, who are displeased with the work of Project Grudge, understandably so, saying it was more of a public relations campaign than actual science. Which, I mean, that's, from what I've read, seems like that's exactly what it was. It was supposed to be a public relations campaign trying to calm the nerves of people filling their heads with lies and calling them crazy if they had seen something that the government did not think was real. So that brings us to the granddaddy, Project Blue Book. All right. So Project Blue Book was the code name for the systematic study of unidentified flying objects by the United States Air Force from March 1952 to its termination on December 17th, 1969. The project, headquartered at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Ohio, was initially directed by Captain Edward J. Ruppelt. I gotta look up that name. It's gonna bother me. So before we go any further, Ruppelt. Edward J. Ruppelt. Captain Edward J. Ruppelt. All right. I had to know. I had to look it up. I'm going to get... So the project, headquartered at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Ohio, was initially directed by Edward J. Ruppelt. Project Blue Book had two goals. One, to determine if UFOs were a threat to national security, and two, to scientifically analyze UFO-related data. So basically, we're doing exactly what Project Grudge was doing, but we're bringing science into it this time, and we all love science. So during this time, from 1952 to 1969, thousands of UFO reports were collected, analyzed, and filed as a result of the Condon Report, which concluded that the study of UFOs was unlikely to yield major scientific discoveries. In a review of the report by the National Academy of Sciences, Project Blue Book was terminated in 1969. The Air Force applies the following of its investigations. 1. No UFO reported, investigated, and evaluated by the Air Force was ever an indication of threat to our national security. But there were ones investigated, evaluated. There was no evidence submitted to or discovered by the Air Force that sightings categorized as unidentified, air quotes, represents technological developments or principles beyond the range of modern scientific knowledge. And 3, there was no evidence indicating that the sightings categorized as unidentified were extraterrestrial vehicles. By the time Project Blue Book ended, it had collected 12,618 UFO reports and concluded that most of them were misidentifications of natural phenomena, clouds, stars, etc., or conventional aircraft. According to the National Reconnaissance Office, a number of the reports could be explained by flights of the formerly secret reconnaissance planes U-2 and A-12. 700 reports were classified as unexplained even after stringent analysis. The UFO reports were archived and are available under the Freedom of Information Act, but names and other personal information of all witnesses have been redacted. Then how free is the information? Am I right? I want names. Name names. So yeah, we have 12,618 UFO reports, most of which are cleared by natural phenomena or just normal aircraft. But there are 701 reports that were classified as unexplainable even after stringent analysis. 701, that's a good chunk. I mean, that's a big period of time, 52 to 69, but still, that's 701 things that the scientists couldn't determine what was causing them. So, let's go through the Project Blue Book history. the Captain Ruppelt era. According to Captain Edward J. Ruppelt, by the end of 1951, several high-ranking, very influential USAF generals were so dissatisfied with the state of Air Force UFO investigations that they dismantled Project Grudge and replaced it with Project Blue Book in March of 1952. One of these men was General Charles P. Cabell, Cabell. Cabell? Cabell. Charles P. Cabell. Another important change came when General William Garland joined Cabell's staff. Garland thought the UFO question deserved serious scrutiny because he had witnessed a UFO. So you got William Garland joining in and saying, hey, look into this because I have seen. So you've got a believer and a seer on the team now. The new name, Project Blue Book, was selected to refer to the blue booklets used for testing at some colleges and universities. The name was inspired, said Ruppelt, by the close attention that high-ranking officers were giving the new project. It felt as if the study of UFOs was as important as a college final exam. Blue Book was also upgraded in status from Project Grudge with the creation of the Aerial Phenomenon branch, which we may have to talk about that branch another day. Ruppelt was the first head of the project. He was an experienced airman, having been decorated for his efforts with the Army Air Corps during World War II and having afterward earned an aeronautics degree. He officially coined the term unidentified flying object to replace the many terms flying saucer, flying disc, and so on. The military had previously used. Ruppelt thought that unidentified flying object was a more neutral and accurate term. Ruppelt resigned from the Air Force some years later and wrote the book, The Report on Unidentified Flying Objects, which described the study of UFOs by the United States Air Force from 1947 to 1955. American scientist Michael D. Swords wrote that Ruppelt would lead the last genuine effort to analyze UFOs. Ruppelt implemented a number of changes. He streamlined the manner in which UFOs were reported to and by military officials, partly in hopes of alleviating the stigma and ridicule associated with UFO witnesses. Ruppelt also ordered the development of a standard questionnaire for UFO witnesses. Hoping to uncover the data that could be subject to statistical analysis, he commissioned the Battelle Memorial Institute to create the questionnaire and computerize the data. Using case reports and the computerized data, Battelle then conducted a massive scientific and statistical study of all Air Force UFO cases, completed in 1954 and known as Project Blue Book Special Report Number 14. Knowing that factionalism had harmed the progress of Project Sign, Ruppelt did his best to avoid the kinds of open-ended speculation that had led to Sign's personnel being split among advocates and critics of the extraterrestrial hypothesis. As Michael Hall writes, Ruppelt not only took the job seriously, but he expected his staff to do so as well. If anyone under him either became too skeptical or too convinced of one particular theory, they soon found themselves off the project. In his book, Ruppelt reported that he fired 3 personnel very early in the project because they were either too pro or too con, one hypothesis or another. Ruppelt sought the advice of many scientists and experts and issued regular press releases, along with classified monthly reports, for military intelligence. Each U.S. Air Force base had a Blue Book officer to collect UFO reports and forward them to Ruppelt. During most of Ruppelt's tenure, he and his team were authorized to interview any and all military personnel who witnessed UFOs and were not required to follow the chain of command. This unprecedented authority underlined the seriousness of Project Blue Book's investigations. Under Ruppelt's direction, Blue Book investigated a number of well-known UFO cases, including the so-called Lubbock Lights and a widely publicized 1952 radar visual case over Washington, D.C. According to Jacques Vallée, Vallee, Jacques. I'm going to Jacques Vallée. I'm just gonna wing it with all these names. Ruppelt started the trend, largely followed by later Blue Book investigations, of not giving serious consideration to numerous reports of UFO landings and/or interaction with purported UFO occupants. Mark down Lubbock Lights. Sounds like something we should do an episode on, or at least look a little more into. Am I right? Luckenbach, Texas. Lubbock. Astronomer Dr. J. Allen Hynek was the scientific consultant of the project. He had been with Project Sign and Grudge. He worked for the project up to its termination, initially created the categorization which had been extended and is known today as Close Encounters. Hynek and Ruppelt were the ones at the end of Grudge were very unhappy that the science was lacking in the studies. So now they're working together on Project Blue Book. Woot woot. He was a pronounced skeptic when he started, but he said that his feelings changed to a more wavering skepticism during the research after encountering a minority of UFO reports he thought were unexplainable. But he said his feelings changed to a more wavering skepticism during the research after encountering a minority of UFO reports that he thought were unexplainable. Ruppelt left Project Blue Book in February of 1953 for a temporary reassignment. He returned a few months later to find his staff reduced from more than 10 to 2 subordinates. Frustrated, Ruppelt suggested that an Air Defense Command Unit, the 4,602nd Air Intelligence Service Squadron, be charged with UFO investigations. All right. Robertson Panel. So in July of 1952, after a buildup of hundreds of sightings over the previous few months, a series of radar detections coinciding with visual sightings were observed near the National Airport in Washington, D.C. The 1952 Washington, D.C. UFO incident. If you're looking to search and look into it more, which we might as well. After much publicity, these sightings led the Central Intelligence Agency to establish a panel of scientists headed by Dr. H.P. Robertson, a physicist of the California Institute of Technology, which included various physicists, meteorologists, and engineers, and one astronomer, Hynek. The Robertson panel first met on January 14th, 1953, in order to formulate a response to the overwhelming public interest in UFOs. Ruppelt, Hynek, and others presented the best evidence, including movie footage that had been collected by Blue Book. After spending 12 hours reviewing 6 years of data, the Robertson panel concluded that the most UFO reports had prosaic explanations and that all could be explained with further investigation, which they deemed not worth the effort. In their final report, they stressed that low-grade, unverifiable UFO reports were overloading intelligence channels with a risk of missing a genuine conventional threat to the U.S. Therefore, they recommended the Air Force de-emphasize the subject of UFOs and embark on a debunking campaign to lessen public interest. They suggested debunkery through the mass media, including Walt Disney Productions, and using psychologists, astronomers, and celebrities to ridicule the phenomena and put forward prosaic explanations. I really love saying prosaic here. And if you don't know, prosaic means lacking in imagination and spirit, or dull, or matter-of-fact, straightforward, or consisting of characteristic of prose. So I'm leaning towards matter-of-fact, straightforward, or lacking in imagination and spirit, or dull. So basically just let these famous people say, yeah, what's going on there? That's ridiculous. don't believe it. Including, I just like how they suggest debunkery through the mass media, including Walt Disney Productions. If you knew how much the Walt Disney Company influenced my childhood and how much they was put into my head, everything that they put out, then yeah, I know a lot of people that was definitely a big part of a lot of people's childhood was Disney. So yeah, just the fact that was one of the government's options for debunking makes you wonder what else they're debunking through Walt Disney. Either way, furthermore, civilian UFO groups, and I quote, should be watched because their potentially great influence on mass thinking, the apparent irresponsibility, and the possible use of such groups for subversive purposes should be kept in mind. Fair enough. It is the conclusion of many researchers that the Robertson panel was recommending controlling public opinion through a program of official propaganda and spying. They also believe these recommendations helped shape Air Force policy regarding UFO study, not only immediately afterward, but also into the present day. There's evidence that the panel's recommendations were being carried out at least 2 decades after its conclusions were issued. In December of 1953, Joint Army-Navy-Air Force Regulation No. 146 made it a crime for military personnel to discuss classified UFO reports with unauthorized persons. Violators faced up to 2 years in prison and/or fines of up to $10,000. Well, that's a little nuts. I know we have our personal information that that the government won't share with us, the classified information and whatnot. But when it says discuss classified UFO reports with unauthorized persons, makes you want to know more when you hear stuff like this. But that was 1953, and we did have our declassification papers back in 2019, 17? The 1,500 declassified documents, which are available online. The Aftermath of Robertson Panel. In his book, Ruppelt described the demoralization of the Project Blue Book staff and the stripping of their investigative duties following the Robertson Panel jurisdiction. As an immediate consequence of the Robertson Panel recommendations in February of 1953, the Air Force issued Regulation 200-2, ordering Air Base officers to publicly discuss UFO incidents only if they were judged to have been solved, and to classify all the unsolved cases to keep them out of the public eye. The same month, investigative duties started to be taken on the newly formed 4,602nd Air Intelligence Squadron, AISS, of the Air Defense Command. The 4,602nd AISS was assigned the task of investigating only the most important UFO cases with intelligence or national security implications. These cases were deliberately siphoned away from Blue Book, leaving Blue Book to deal with the more trivial reports. General Nathan Twining, who started Project Sign in 1947, was now Air Force Chief of Staff. In August 1954, he was to further codify the responsibilities of the 4,602nd AISS by issuing an updated Air Force Regulation 200-2. In addition, UFOs, called UFO-Bs, were defined as any airborne object which by performance, aerodynamic characteristics, or unusual features does not conform to any presently known aircraft or missile type, or which cannot be positively identified as a familiar object. Investigation of UFOs was stated to be for the purpose of national security and to ascertain technical aspects. AFR 200-2 again stated that Blue Book could discuss UFO cases with the media only if they were regarded as having a conventional explanation. If they were unidentified, the media was to be told that the situation was being analyzed. Blue Book was also ordered to reduce the number of unidentified to a minimum. All this work was done secretly. The public face of Blue Book continued to be the official Air Force investigation of UFOs, but the reality was it had essentially been reduced to doing very few serious investigations and had become almost solely a public relations outfit with a debunking mandate. To cite one example, by the end of 1956, the number of cases listed as unsolved had dipped to barely 0.4% from 20 to 30% only a few years earlier. Eventually, Ruppelt requested reassignment. At his departure in August 1953, his staff had been reduced from more than 10, precise numbers of personnel varied, to just 2 subordinates and himself. His temporary replacement was a non-commissioned officer, and their names were Mulder and Skolnick. Most who succeeded him as Blue Book director exhibited either apathy or outright hostility to the subject of UFOs, or were hampered by a lack of funding and official support. UFO investigators often regarded Ruppelt's brief tenure at Blue Book as the high watermark of public Air Force investigations of UFOs, when UFO investigations were treated seriously and had support at high levels. Thereafter, Project Blue Book descended into a new dark ages, from which many UFO investigators argue it never emerged. However, Ruppelt later came to embrace the Blue Book perspective that there was nothing extraordinary about UFOs. He even labeled the subject a space age myth. Alright, so I've finished recording. This is a separate recording from the initial recording, but it'll all seem like it's one recording once I'm done with it. Either way, we're going to split this episode into a 2-parter. I just got done recording the second half of it, which is about another hour long. I know I don't want to listen to me talk for that long. Maybe you do. Listen to the episodes back to back. But either way, we're going to call it here for this portion of the episode. Thank you for tuning in. Please check out the social medias. The easiest way to find me is going to linktr.ee/DOTU podcast. When you go there, you'll be able to find all of my social medias for Doors of the Universe podcast. Everything from YouTube to everywhere we're able to be streamed. If you feel like donating, if you feel so generous as to donate, there is a Patreon. You can do a monthly subscription for as little as $1 a month there. Help me out. Let me know if there's an incentive that would make you want to do Patreon. Like, what could I put out for making you a subscriber? I don't know. We'll see how it goes. But if you would like to do a one-time donation, you can do that directly on anchor.fm/DOTU. But yeah, check out the link tree, linktr.ee/DOTU podcast, with all of our socials on there. And we will see you next week. Well, in 2 weeks for the second half of the Project Blue Book episode. Thank you for listening. Tell a friend. So as I mentioned earlier, keep an eye to the sky and watch out for the little green and red blinking lights in the sky. They're probably satellites, but if not, I'll see you in 2 weeks. Thanks.